And I think for people out who, we look at the world today and it looks like the world is a little bit crazy, and particularly when the US election is coming up. And I think sometimes we look at the world and we're like, we project out all of our unconsciousness, right? We're afraid of our anger, and so we just judge everybody else's anger. Right. And so we can look at politicians that kind of ignite us sometimes. And so sometimes the politicians, they're in their own trauma, right? They're acting out their own trauma. Yeah. But sometimes they're actually assholes. Yeah. And how do you decipher if they're really an asshole or they're just like an unburdened or like an unconscious part of me that I'm projecting out? And I would actually really love to be more powerful and arrogant and things like that. And I'm denying myself, so I get mad when they do it.
Right.
Or they actually are just not good people.
Yeah. So, not to mention any names, but...
Not to mention names.
Right. There are people who become so dominated by these protective asshole parts that they seem like total assholes and they can do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
But, you know, I thought, okay, these critics aren't so bad, these eating disorder parts aren't so bad, but what about people who molested little kids? What about people who raped women or even murdered people?
Yeah.
So I deliberately, back in the early days, went to those facilities. I consulted to a treatment center for sex offenders for a couple of years. And we would go to the part that committed those offenses and ask it, you know, just get curious about it and try to not hate it. And ask where it was stuck in the past. And to a person, they would show these scenes when they were being abused.
Wow.
And how this part, who carried the abuser's energy, looked around the room and said, who has power in this room? It's this guy doing this to me.
Oh, wow.
Took in the perpetrator's energy, and then gets stuck with his desire to hurt vulnerability.
Wow.
And that, okay, I guess there are no bad parts.
Yeah. It all makes sense.
Yeah, and we just got a lot of money in Washington State to do a outcome study with perpetrators of domestic violence.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about that.
Wow. I understand that. So if you looked at a society, and we don't need to go into all the details of everything going on in the world, but there's just a lot of war and hurt and damage and pain going on in the world. And do you see that the vast majority of that is unhealed trauma?
Very much.
Playing out? Generational trauma or this trauma, and that it's just unprocessed. So all of a sudden we demonize some group because we did not ever feel the trauma that we had.
That's right. I mean, there's a way to look at this collectively and how groups of people carry these, what we call legacy burdens.
Yeah.
You know, my father's side is Jewish, and so I carried a bunch of Holocaust legacy burdens. And it was really powerful to unload all that. And
how did you unload it? How did you?
IFS.
Yeah, and could you talk a little bit more? Not that there's anybody looking to unload any burdens in here, but
right. So again, it was interfering in relationships. There was it wasn't just the part I mentioned, but there was a part that carried a huge amount of fear that I could sense wasn't from my life. I had some trauma in my life, but not that level.
Yeah.
And so I had somebody that I traded sessions with, and I had him help me focus on that fear and get curious about it.
Yeah.
And this person was very psychic, kind of, and I also could see these burning piles of bodies.
Wow.
And so we could help find the part that carried all that and just send it out.
Yeah.
So I know it sounds pretty easy.